What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. And we're going to talk about Yakima, Washington. Shout out Washington State. I don't talk about them very often, man. So specifically, Erik Carrasco, a member of La Raza, a northerner clique out there, Yakima, been around for a while, been in the news a bunch of times, right? So Mr. Carrasco, as a juvenile, gets sentenced to 1,126 months in prison. That translates to 93 years and 10 months, right? So let's talk about what he did. What happened at trial. There's some spots in there where, like, man, that fool should have had a gang expert or a better, defense person helping his attorney. Things could have gone a little bit different. Also, he should have been coached before he testified in his own case because he didn't do himself any favors. And we're going to get into some of that. And then also he appeals, right? And it's like, damn, well, that's a long ass time for being my age. What's going on? Unconstitutional. And so what happens as he goes to the court? Goes all the way to the Supreme Court, right, in Washington. So what happens there? I will tell you. So January 2010, Carrasco's 16 at the time, and he gets caught with a pistol at Davis High School, right? Got in an argument with somebody, most likely somebody told, and school resource officer hems him up, finds a banger. He's in trouble, off to the hall, right? Not his first time getting in trouble, but never been in any really serious trouble before. So he's not in there very long because in April, right, April 20th, 2010, he's walking evening time and he's going to the little corner store, little market. Every neighborhood has one, sometimes two or three. And on his way there, he stops at his homeboy's house, right? Ernesto Cuevas, who lives on North 4th Street, which is all within La Raza's hood, you know? So stops over there, Cuevas is from the hood too. His brother's out there. There's a female out there. Some other people. They're kicking it, doing what young high school kids do in the front yard, right? Um, and then an incident happens. Okay. So according to what Carrasco says, when he testifies in his trial, right, he says that a green car, right, with 5 people in it, a green car stops at the corner store. Him and Cuevas are telling people, hey, fool, let's go inside just in case something happens, quote unquote. But it doesn't happen. Nobody goes inside. Everybody stays out there. So the green car comes driving down the street real slow. There's 5 people in there. They're all Southsiders. They start hollering Varrio Sureño Lokotes, right? VSL, saying derogatory stuff about Northerners and their names and blah, blah, woofing. How people do, right? Wow, wow, wow. Chest bump. And somebody allegedly throws a beer can from within the car. And the beer can hits Carrasco in the head. Boom. Right? Good shot. He pulls out a 45 and lets off some shots. He says like 3. Most witnesses say there was 5 or 6, but he says he lets off 3 shots in the direction of the car because when he gets hit with the beer can and he looks, he sees something shiny in the car. And at times he says it looked like it was a gun. Then other times, especially at trial, he made the mistake of backing off of that and like, well, it's some shiny object. I don't really know what it was. And he was actually asked at one point, you didn't see anybody pull a gun on you that day, did you? And he goes, not that I know of. Okay, that's not helpful to your case, homie. But nonetheless, that's what he says. So he shoots 3 times at the vehicle, 3 times, 5 times, 6 times, doesn't really matter. One of those bullets hits a kid inside, 15-year-old Alexis Ista. Hits him in the head. He dies. Bullet goes through his head, hits this other out in the arm. He doesn't die. The other 3 are unhurt, just traumatized, right? Odd kind of side note, the cops say, right, Yakima police say that they had taken Alexis Ista home the day before and got at his parents and told his parents, hey, Trusa, your kid is hanging out with gangs. He's going to wind up getting himself in some trouble, some serious trouble. Next day, he's dead. You know what I mean? So that's rough, right, for the parents and everybody. So Carrasco ends up arrested, right? And at first, he says that he didn't do it. He was inside the house when the gunshots went off. You don't know. But eventually, he says, yes, he did it. He admits to it, but he says it was self-defense, right? And then I just told you essentially what he said at trial, but we're going to get more into that in a minute. Storm Lopez was inside the Southsider's car, right? Unclear if it's a male or female. I don't know. Said, yeah, we were in the car. We left the store, but we didn't want any problems. We didn't provoke anybody. Heard someone say something like, let's fight, or you want to get down. Heard 5 or 6 shots, ducked, didn't see what happened, looked up, all bad, right? Romero Camacho was the one that was hitting the arm, right? So the bullet that went through Alexis Ista hits Romero Camacho and says, yeah, fool, we're Southsiders off top, right? And we were in the wrong hood. We were in the wrong side of town. But I was drinking. I was high on Xannies. I don't really remember what led to it. But, quote, we probably might have got into something while I was in the blackout stage. Okay? Take that for what you will. Jasmine Johnson says she was in the front yard, right? She was with Cuevas and Carrasco, but she can't really remember anything. Although at the time she did give a statement. At trial, she can't remember. But at the time, she does admit that she gave a statement to police saying she saw Carrasco get hit with a beer can. Okay. Ernesto Cuevas says, maybe I saw a beer can, maybe I saw a gun, but I was inside the house. That old dry snitching ass, like, that's telling, right? Well, I don't know what happened. It reminds me of my case. You know, he had a gun. I heard he shot him. I believe it's true. I know it's not that guy. I seen a gunshot come from around him, but I don't know. That's telling. So anyways, Cuevas tells, right? But not tells like this guy, Ricardo Vasquez. So Ricardo Vasquez is not there when well, maybe he's there. Maybe he's not. He's not in the front yard with these folks when this happens, okay? But in July 2010, he's popped for an assault. So he approaches police. Hey, I want to be a good Samaritan. Take this assault charge down, and I'll give you information on this murder. So youngster's already arrested, right? Carrasco's already arrested. Carrasco's already in the hall at this time. You know, so it's not like they're looking for somebody. But he's like, I could just put the whipped cream and the cherry on top. So what he says is he actually drove past that house on 4th twice that night. The first time he sees Carrasco out front with the Cuevas brothers, he recognizes them and he knows them because he was once a La Raza Northerner as well. The second time, or that first time, second time, he comes by, he sees a bunch of people jumping in a green car and taking off. Carrasco shoots at them as they drive away. The car that he's shooting at passes by him. He notices that one of their windows is shot out. They all look very panicked. He does not see a gun, and he never saw them throw anything. But wait, there's more. He also said that he talked to Carrasco when they were both in the hall. And Carrasco told him he was happy to earn his first stripe, right? So Vasquez is like, yeah, a stripe is necessary to rise up in the gang. I mean, you got to kill people, get stripes. So that's the name of the game. And Carrasco's happy that he's got his stripe out. You know what I mean? And that Carrasco also allegedly told him that he sent some of his homies to go check this little kid that was running his mouth. According to Vasquez, what it means to check somebody, a chequeada, is they just get jumped and then they're okay again. Now, I don't know what things are like with these folks. Generally speaking, if somebody's telling on you or running their mouth about a case that you caught and you're in jail and you're going to take the step to get people on the streets to address that situation, you're probably going a little bit further than, oh, hey, take him in the back car and slap him around a little bit. Just saying, maybe not. I feel like Vasquez is putting a little extra on it. Personally, that's my thought. So, and we'll get into that. So Carrasco gets charged second-degree murder, right? 4 first-degree assaults, unlawful possession of a firearm, okay? So when he winds up getting sentenced in 2012, the public defender says, hey, can we get like the low end, right? So for sentencing guidelines, there's the low, the middle, and the high, okay? So his public defender says, can we get the low end and none of the gang stuff, right? Which would mean 67 years and 2 months. You know you're in bad shape when your public defender is trying to argue for a sentence of leniency that is 67 years and 2 months. Public defender failed in this job. The DA is like, nah, we want the high end on everything, plus 113 months for all the gang factors. The court gives him, the judge gives him, because he goes to trial, jury finds him guilty off top, right? So he goes to trial. The judge sentences him to the high end of the middle range, right? For each of the counts, plus 300 months as a mandatory firearm enhancement, and 100 months for the gang. So it 20 months for each thing, 20 months for the murder, and then 20 months for each of the assaults. So equals to 100 months, right? So he's got over 30 years, 35 years, something like that, in gun and gang enhancements. And the judge tells him he's 17. He's 19 when he's sentenced. He's 17 barely when he catches it. Because in January, he's 16. In April, he's 17, right? So barely 17. The judge tells him, quote, you'd have to be the oldest man in the world to ever get out. And that's appropriate given your mindset. You're too dangerous, right? 90 some odd years, man, at 17, right? That's a lot. So the DA in this case, right, says, hey, the state says, we're going to introduce kind of general gang evidence, right? General gang evidence. And the witnesses we're going to use to introduce this is Vasquez, the rat, right? The primary rat, and Yakima Police Detective Shaw, right? And what they're going to talk about is the importance of respect in gang culture, earning stripes. What does this mean for Carrasco? What does this mean for La Raza neighborhood? Blah, 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 right? That's not unusual. That's not unusual at all. Most cases that I've worked, I do defense work for attorneys in gang cases, right? And immigration cases. Most cases that I've worked, that gets introduced. Hey, we got this cop, we got this gang cop who's going to tell you all about how it works in the hood, judge, and we need him to testify because the jury needs to understand how gangs work. This is very mysterious subculture, right? The judge allowed it, right? Gang evidence is critical in understanding the motive. And even if you want to claim self-defense, it is self-defense to the gang-motivated aggression. And I've said before on here, it is incredibly difficult, almost impossible, to successfully use self-defense if the jury is of the belief that it's a gang issue, right? Because you're not entitled to self-defense being a gang member because your very presence is an act of aggression. Your very presence invites violence, right? It's twisted, but that's why you need good people to help defend you, right? So the defense is just Mr. Carrasco. Everybody else was a DA witness. So the only defense this kid has is him, right? And clearly, by how the questioning went, his attorney did not work with him on how to explain what his experience was. And I do not encourage people to lie on the stand, right? That would be illegal. You don't want to do that. Perjury. Careful. But there are different ways to explain what you're experiencing. There's different ways to explain what you're feeling, what you've seen. And it's very easy to get tricked into giving off an impression where afterwards you're like, nah, fool, that's not what I meant. Okay, but it's too late. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, right? So Carrasco winds up testifying. Well, first Vasquez. Vasquez testifies. He's a gang expert now, right? This dude who caught an assault and is like, hey, look at me over here. I'm going to snitch on my homie if you don't give me the assault charge. That dude is a gang expert now, right? Because he said, I was a part of La Raza gang. The DA loves that. Oh, here you go. Your Honor, he's going to give you the inner workings of this neighborhood. He, as a former gang member who's now doing the right thing to become an upstanding member of society, he's going to explain to you how these gangs work. He knows. And of course, the dude's going to say whatever he got to say to get the deal that he wants. I mean, you're already telling, you might as well just jump all the way in, I guess. So he's like, oh, killing rivals is the best thing you could do in a gang. It's the main goal of being in a gang is to kill rivals because then there's less of them and more of you. That's literally what he says, right? That's not my experience with being in a gang. I know a lot of you guys have ran around the neighborhood, however you choose to classify yourself. Um, that's not how I came up. I didn't start banging, quote unquote, at 10, 11 years old because I wanted to kill all the rivals. I know about rivals. You know what I mean? I hung out with my homeboys. So it's a very distorted view. It's a very law enforcement centric view, a very district attorney friendly view. And there's no coincidence in that. Well, here comes Carrasco. He's testifying. His life is on the line, right? So he says, yeah, earning stripes enhances your reputation. They asked him, does it help you move up in the gang? He goes, yeah. And he also said, hey, because I'm a Norteño, the words used by those Southsiders made me angry and made me upset. And it's quote unquote pretty important to take action when you've been disrespected in your neighborhood. And then he's like, hey, part of this is on the Southsiders' responsibility because they knew they were in the wrong hood regardless. They were out of bounds. They know that. They knew they didn't belong over here. They should have known something was going to happen to them. Okay, you can't say that shit, bro. You're not helping yourself in the eyes of a jury, right? Once you claim self-defense, then it's on the state, right, to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that self-defense was not at play. But in the appeal, right, he appealed in 2015 the first time. In the appellate court, they're like, dude, Carrasco had no testimony in his favor of it being self-defense. He had nothing to help him. So he can say that, but there's nothing to support it. And in fact, a lot of stuff to the opposite, right? And so there's this thing called a consciousness of guilt. There's a couple witnesses who didn't know the kid, who didn't know Carrasco, but somebody matching his description was seen running down the street after the shooting. So like that's a consciousness of guilt. In other words, you know what you did was wrong, right? So that's a sign that you were aware that this wasn't just self-defense. It was assaultive, right? And these people's testimony, man, they explain, and you yourself said that you're trying to move up in a gang, but he didn't say he's trying to move up in a gang. He's trying to explain what getting a stripe is. Vasquez is saying he just got a stripe and he bragged about it in jail. It's not hard to put two and two together, but a good defense attorney, you never let your person go testify without coaching them. And again, that doesn't mean teaching them, encouraging them to lie, right? Again, that would be against the law. Don't suborn perjury. But teaching them how to explain, preparing them. They're going to ask you this. When they ask you this, what are you going to say? Oh, I'm going to tell them, fuck that. Okay, that's an option. But let's play the tape. Let's play out the consequences of that, right? His attorney had nobody to challenge this Vasquez kid. You got a juvenile rat that's now this authoritative voice on neighborhood gangs for this jury. And his credibility is unquestioned because there's nobody on the other side to point out the obvious. Hey, this fool shopping for a deal. The odds that he drove up and down the street these 2 times is kind of unusual. Why is he the only one that says that people jumped out of a car and jumped back in? Nobody else said that, only him, right? What does it matter that he didn't see a gun when they drove by? You know, what is his knowledge? What is his awareness? He says the primary purpose for being in a gang is to kill rivals. Let's check the homicide rate. How many murders are there in Yakima, Washington? How many gang members do the police say they are, right? Do they say there's 500 gang members in this neighborhood? You know, they always have numbers, right? 1,000 validated gang members, you know, and it's anybody that walks around with a red belt or blue Cortez or whatever, but still use those numbers. So you got 500 gang members in this neighborhood. The main goal is murder. What you got, 3 murders? So it's 497 failures of a gang member? Or maybe there's more to this quote unquote gang stuff than killing people. Maybe that's an exaggeration. Maybe that's not credible. Well, if that's not credible, then how much else that he's saying is not credible? You know what I mean? Like, you have to be critical. You have to challenge. But these defense attorneys too often either don't have the resources or don't have the knowledge to do it. And a lot of communities, the only gang experts they even have for defense attorneys are retired cops that now get their bread buttered on the other side. You know, they used to be the one going to court when you were charged. Now all of a sudden they sign up to go to the court in your defense. But their training comes from the same place. Their expertise, so to speak, is the same. They're not going to often disagree with the cop that's on the other side of them. That's their homeboy. That's their brethren. That's their colleague. That's who they got trained with. So how are they going to go up there and say something opposite? They really believe that shit, right? Or college professors, which haven't set foot in the neighborhood in their whole life and write all these theory books and can theorize about anything, but juries don't trust them because they know, damn fool, you're kind of smart. I could probably be talked into or out of anything, right? But you don't know. And then they contrast that with the cop. The cop's the boots on the ground every day. He's interacting with these gang members every day. He knows. They're going to believe Professor so-and-so, right? You need competent help, community support. That's what community legal defense is. Anyways, let's go on with this case, right? So he appeals and he says, you violated my constitutional right, man. Not only because you let all this gang evidence in, which you shouldn't have, right? And the standard for evidence coming in is it has to be relevant to the case. It has to be factual. It has to be relevant. It has to be necessary in order for the jury or the judge to render a accurate verdict in a case. And the scale has to tip where it's more valuable than finding out the truth of this situation than it is harmful to your reputation and possibly make you look bad, right? And so that's what he argued, right? That the value was more to make me look bad. They said, nope, it's all good. All that stuff was welcome. And he says, okay, what about the long sentence? Like, give me a boatload of time. And they have a law that had come out since he got sentenced, right? A court case was decided. And they said, look, if you're a juvenile lifer, basically, right? A juvenile facing a felony case in adult court, the judge has to consider as a mitigating factor. So as a factor in favor of lesser penalty, which doesn't mean no penalty, but lesser penalty. A judge has to consider the fact that you're a juvenile. You're of diminished capacity, right? Because you're young. Well, in this case, that wasn't done, right? The court also says the sentencing guidelines, the mandated sentences and that kind of stuff, those don't apply to juveniles in adult court. You can't apply that to them, right? Because they're still juveniles. So you don't have to these maximums and minimums. You could go much lower than that, right? And you should. That wasn't done in Carrasco's case, right? So he's like, hey, at least I should go for resentencing. He's not arguing he's not guilty. He was pushing for a new trial. The new trial wasn't going to happen. You know what I mean? But he was pushing for a new trial. And so when in the same appeal, though, he's also saying, at least let me get resentenced. You know, say 90 plus years. Come on, Holmes, right? They say, well, it is a violation. It is an 8th Amendment violation. You're right. But we don't have to send you for resentencing because we also have this law now where after 20 years, you could petition the board to come home. Right? If you're a juvenile serving a long time, after 20 years of that, you can go to the board and be like, hey, I think I should be let out. And a little bit different than how it works here or how it's worked here in the past in California. I mean, the board has to start from the premise of you can be released. And if they want to hold you, they have to be able to prove beyond a preponderance of the evidence that there is no circumstance, no situation, no release conditions whatsoever that could mitigate the threat that you are to society, right? Because when they say release, it doesn't mean just go home, right? There's house arrest, there's ankle monitors, there's, obviously probation. There's all kinds of different levels of release, So odds are you get released, right? But in that, they can mandate that out of custody supervision, so to speak, for the duration of the time that you were originally sentenced. In other words, this dude could be on house arrest for the rest of his life, right? He could be on an ankle monitor for the rest of his life. He could be in a halfway house for the rest of his life, assuming he gets out. I don't know Washington's track record when it comes to letting these youngsters out, but I do know in looking at this, a kid sentenced to 90 plus years is not necessarily unusual there. I found cases of juvenile sentenced to 75 years, 80 years, a handful of like in the high 60s, early 70s, a lot of them doing time like that, which is insane. And so that's why I posed the question in my community post. Is this dude's sentence extreme? Right? 16, barely 17, gangbanging, right? It's called what it is. Both sides, right? Allegedly. Something happens. He gets pissed off. He shoots at him, right? I'm not justifying the loss of life. I'm not encouraging violence. But as a teenager, is that something that warrants basically life without? And that's what the court said is technically you don't have life without anymore. You have life with the possibility because after 20 years, you can seek to be released. I think he still should have been brought back for resentencing because in that resentencing, he wouldn't have gotten 90 some odd years. He's not going to get out right away, but he would have gotten much less time. And then let's say he still gets out after the 20 years, because that applies either way. The duration in which he could be in a halfway house or house arrest or whatever is a little bit shorter, right? Right now, it's forever potentially. So anyways, thought it was an interesting case. It's a sad case. You know what I'm saying? A mother lost her kid, right? And she spoke at the sentencing. And she said 2 people lost their kids that day, right? Her and Carrasco's family. She was empathetic. You know what I mean? Of this gang thing took them both, right? And one's dead, and one in a lot of ways might as well be dead because he ain't never coming home, 90-something years. So what do you guys think? The kids should have to write it out, or well, do the crime, do the time, or you think some adjustments there, or let me know in the comments. Help others move in excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time because you're worth it. And if you're fighting a case, man, get some help. Get some help. And also, remember, you have the right to remain silent. So any explanation that you give, well, I think I might have seen this. I think I might have seen that. I'm not discouraging people from talking. If you want to talk, talk. Okay. But understand that you are doing harm to somebody by doing that. Perhaps yourself, perhaps somebody else. Just stop. Fucking stop. You don't have to answer every question. You don't have to answer any of them. Anyways, take care, you guys. Check out the other content, and I'll see you on the next one.